Now, I think journalists have a special responsibility to our democracy in a time like this. As Ida B. Wells once said, people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare to the press. Now, many of you are showing the way. So I hope you'll keep calling it like you see it. Keep holding all of us accountable.
Hi, I'm Yamiche Alcindor. I'm a national political reporter with the New York Times. My question is, you've accused Donald Trump of using racist and sexist language. What does it say about the electorate that so many Americans are supporting him?
Well, I really believe that the core of his support, I'm not going to speak for everyone who supports him, because I think there have been some quite distressing statements coming out of his rallies and his supporters and who has aligned themselves with him. But I think the core of his support really centers on the disappointment in the economy that so many Americans feel. And what I have been saying is, you know, I want to bring this country together. I think we have three overarching goals. We need more economic opportunity, we need to protect our national security, and we have got to work toward American unity. So I have been trying to understand what it is that has driven people to support Trump. And I've met with some people. I have listened to them. And so many of them are looking for an explanation as to why they lost the job they had for 18 years when the factory closed and nobody cared about them. What they're going to do when their whole life was spent mining coal and they made $80,000 a year, now they can barely find a job making minimum wage. Why the centers of so many old industrial towns in America are hollowed out and people are turning to opiates and heroin. And the list goes on, and that's what I've heard. So I think we have to recognize that, of course, some of the appeal is xenophobic and racist and misogynistic and offensive. We have to acknowledge that. But let's not lose sight of the real pain that many Americans are feeling because the economy has left them behind. So I said it again in my acceptance speech last Thursday, I want to be the president for all Americans. I want to lift up and give everybody a chance to pursue their dreams. And that means people who are supporting him. When I went to West Virginia, I knew that I was not going to win West Virginia, I can tell you that. And I was in a meeting with a group of folks, including a coal miner who was incredibly emotional in talking to me. And outside, there was a big Trump protest going on. And one of the people at the protest, for goodness sakes, was Blankenship, who had just been convicted of reckless indifference toward the well-being of his coal miners, causing deaths. So clearly the lines are pretty stark. But I have said, you know, I've got a plan for coal country, I've got a plan for Indian country, I've got a plan for inner cities, I've got a plan for rural communities. It's one of the reasons, as I said in my remarks, that I support Jim Clyburn's 10-20-30 proposal, which would help all kinds of communities in America. Jim and I have talked about this. So we have to reject and stand up against the appeals to the kind of bigotry and the use of bluster and bullying that we see coming from Trump's campaign. But let's not forget the real economic challenges that too many Americans of all backgrounds are facing today. So that's how I think about it. And that's how I'm going to try in this campaign to respond to and rebuke all of the horrible things he says on a pretty regular basis, but not about me. I could care less about that. But when he goes after individuals, when he accuses a distinguished federal judge of Mexican heritage of not being fair, when he insults a Gold Star family of a Muslim American who served in the military, you know the list. I will stand up and call him out on that. But I will also keep reaching out to Americans of all races and ethnicities and wherever they live to tell them that I am not going to forget about them after this election. I'm going to work my heart out to help every single person have a better job with a rising income and make sure their kids get a good education and everything else that I think they're owed here in America.
Great, wonderful. And I think we have another question from our panel.
Madam Secretary, Ed O'Keefe of the Washington Post, thank you for being here, and I think on behalf of all of us, we encourage you to do this more often with reporters across the country, especially those news organizations that travel the country with you everywhere you go. A majority of voters consistently say, frankly, they don't like you and they don't trust you. And they say pretty much the same thing about Donald Trump. Either you or Mr. Trump will be elected president. How would you lead a nation where a majority of Americans mistrust you? And what extra responsibility might you have to show that you're up to the task?
Well, let me start by saying every time I have done a job, people have counted on me and trusted me. And at the convention last week, we highlighted the fights of my life, starting as a lawyer for the Children's Defense Fund, taking on the problem of juveniles in adult jails in South Carolina, segregated academies, so-called, in Alabama, fighting for kids with disabilities to get an education, and all the way through the work I did as senator after 9/11 and representing all of you as Secretary of State. So there is, and I take this seriously. Don't doubt that. I take it seriously. It doesn't make me feel good when people say those things, and I recognize that I have work to do. But when I started running for the Senate in New York, a lot of the same things were said. I won. I worked hard for the people of New York, and I was reelected with 67% of the vote after I demonstrated that I would be on their side, I would fight for the people I represented. I ran a really hard campaign against Barack Obama, as I think everybody remembers. It got a little contentious from time to time. And to my surprise, he turns around and asks me to be Secretary of State because he trusted me. And then I served as Secretary of State. And when I left, I had a 66% approval rating. So ask yourselves, were 67% of the people in New York wrong? Were 66% of the American public wrong? Or maybe, just maybe, when I'm actually running for a job, there is a real benefit to those on the other side in trying to stir up as much concern as possible. So I take it seriously, and I'm going to work my heart out in this campaign and as president to produce results for people, to get the economy to work for everybody, not just those at the top, to do as much as I can to help people who, as I said earlier, may not even vote for me, because I think our country is at a crossroads election. President Obama said it extremely well, both in what his speech discussed in the convention, what his press conferences since have pointed out. This is a crossroads election. There is so much at stake. You can look at my record of public service. You can meet people and families who were benefited by the Children's Health Insurance Program. You can meet people who were benefited by reforming the foster care and adoption system. You can meet first responders and survivors from 9/11 who were benefited because I went to bat for them. You can meet National Guards members and their families who didn't have health care unless they were deployed before I worked with Republicans to fix that. You can go down a long list, and we'd be happy to provide it to you, of what I have done because I believe in public service. And I am proud that I've had the great opportunity to work on behalf of giving more people a better life ever since I was right out of law school. So I'm just going to get up every day and make my case. And I think there'll be an opportunity for a lot of people to actually hear it.
Madam Secretary, your poll numbers went way up this week, and yet the email controversy was still in the headlines. So I want to give you the opportunity to respond. This week, you told two separate news organizations that FBI Director James Comey said, quote, "My answers were truthful and that what I said is consistent with what I have told the American people." That assertion, as you know, has been debunked by multiple news organizations, which point out that Director Comey did say there's no indication that you lied to the FBI, but he didn't weigh in on whether or not you were truthful to the American people. So my question for you is, are you mischaracterizing Director Comey's testimony? And is this not undercutting your efforts to rebuild trust with the American people?
Well, Kristen, I appreciate your asking that, because I was pointing out in both of those instances that Director Comey had said that my answers in my FBI interview were truthful. That's really the bottom line here. And I have said during the interview and in many other occasions over the past months that what I told the FBI, which he said was truthful, is consistent with what I have said publicly. So I may have short-circuited it, and for that I will try to clarify, because I think Chris Wallace and I were probably talking past each other, because of course he could only talk to what I had told the FBI, and I appreciated that. Now, I have acknowledged repeatedly that using two email accounts was a mistake, and I take responsibility for that. But I do think, having him say that my answers to the FBI were truthful, and then I should quickly add what I said was consistent with what I had said publicly, and that's really sort of, in my view, trying to tie both ends together.
Is the one inconsistency, though, that you said you'd never sent or received classified material, and he did say there were 3 emails that were marked classified at the time. Is that an inconsistency?
Well, here are the facts behind that as well. You know that I sent over 30,000 emails to the State Department that were work-related emails. Director Comey said that only 3 out of 30,000 had anything resembling classified markers. What does that mean? Well, usually, if any of you have ever served in the government, a classified document has a big heading on the top, which makes very clear what the classification is. And in questioning, Director Comey made the point that the 3 emails out of the 30,000 did not have the appropriate markings. And it was therefore reasonable to conclude that anyone, including myself, would have not suspected that they were classified. And in fact, I think that has been discussed by others who have said 2 out of those 3 were later explained by the State Department not to have been in any way confidential at the time that they were delivered. So that leaves the 100 out of 30,000 emails that Director Comey testified contained classified information. But again, he acknowledged there were no markings on those 100 emails. And so what we have here is pretty much what I have been saying throughout this whole year, and that is that I never sent or received anything that was marked classified. Now, if in retrospect, which is what is behind the 100 number, if in retrospect some different agencies said, but it should have been, although it wasn't, it should have been, that's what the debate is about. But Director Comey said there was absolutely no intention on my part to either ignore or in any way dismiss the importance of those documents because they weren't marked classified. So that would have been hard to do. And I will go back to where I started. I regret using one account. I've taken responsibility for that, but I'm pleased to be able to clarify and explain what I think the bottom line is on this.
And just very quickly, before we get to our panel, Donald Trump says this whole thing means that you can't be trusted with national security. Today, you were endorsed by former CIA Director Michael Morell, who says it's Trump who can't be trusted, and he went so far as to indicate that he's been turned by Putin. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I had the great honor of working with Mike Morell, spending a lot of hours with him in the Situation Room in the White House. He is a consummate professional who has devoted his entire professional career to protecting our country. I was honored to receive his endorsement. I will let his comments speak for themselves, but I really appreciated his explaining, as he did in his op-ed, some of what's at stake in this election. Because I may need to ask your help. I may need you to put pressure on elected officials. I may need you to flood the internet or flood the old-fashioned, mailbox of elected representatives so they know people are watching. But that's how we're going to get it done. And I'm actually pretty confident and optimistic about that. So I hope that people will take this election seriously, because I sure take you seriously. And together, I think we can create the kind of future that every one of our kids and grandkids deserves. Thank you all very much.
Secretary Clinton, we are out of time. We want to thank you very much. Everyone, please give a big round of applause to Secretary Clinton for coming and answering our questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The hall, to stay put.
Madam Secretary? Kevin Merritt, Editor-in-Chief of The Undefeated at ESPN. What is the most meaningful conversation you've had with an African-American friend?
Oh my gosh.